The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, and Kresh figured this would be the night she finally froze to death in the alley behind the grain mill, where the wind could not quite reach her. But the cold still gnawed through her threadbare cloak like teeth through rotted cloth. She pressed herself against the wooden wall, her green skin already numb, her tusks chattering despite how she clenched her jaw, watching the white flakes drift down through the narrow gap between buildings as if the world itself had decided to bury her alive and forget she had ever existed. The town of Millhaven had made it abundantly clear that orcs were not welcome within its walls, but desperation had driven her here anyway after the debt collectors had taken everything, every last copper, every scrap of dignity, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a stack of papers that said she owed more money than she could earn in 10 lifetimes. Her father had been a good orc, a trader who believed that honest work could build bridges between their people and the humans, but his generosity had been his downfall when he had guaranteed loans for orcish families who could not repay them. And when he died of fever last winter, the debt had fallen to Kresh like a mountain collapsing on her shoulders. She had tried to work, tried to earn enough to pay even a fraction of what was owed, but no one in the orc settlements would hire the daughter of the fool who had bankrupted half the community. And humans certainly would not give work to an orc woman no matter how strong her back or willing her hands. So she had wandered, growing thinner and weaker, until the first snows came and she knew she had to find shelter or die. And even Millhaven's hostile glares seemed preferable to dying alone in the wilderness. But Millhaven had offered nothing except contempt and the occasional thrown rock, and now she huddled in this alley, feeling the cold work its way into her bones, wondering if her father would forgive her for failing so completely at everything he had believed in. Her eyes grew heavy despite the cold, which she knew was a bad sign, the kind of sleep you did not wake from, but she lacked the strength to fight it anymore. The world began to blur at the edges, white and gray blending together, and she thought she heard footsteps, but could not summon the energy to care who might be coming to kick her or spit on her, or simply tell her to die somewhere else where decent people would not have to see her corpse. Christ Almighty, you will die out here. The voice was male, human, rough with concern rather than anger, and Kresh forced her eyes open to see a tall figure silhouetted against the falling snow, broad-shouldered and wearing a heavy wool coat that looked warm enough to cost a fortune. "Can you stand? Can you hear me?" She tried to speak, but her jaw would not cooperate properly, so she managed only a faint sound that might have been a yes or might have been nothing at all. The man crouched beside her, and she saw his face properly now, weathered and honest, maybe 30 years old with dark hair dusted white with snow and gray eyes that held genuine worry, rather than the disgust she had grown accustomed to seeing. He reached out carefully, as if afraid she might bolt or bite, and touched her shoulder, then pulled his hand back quickly. "You are freezing. How long have you been out here?" He did not wait for an answer she could not give, instead shrugging out of his coat and draping it over her, the warmth shocking against her frozen skin. "My name is Henry Jameson. I have a farm 2 miles north of town. I came to sell grain and buy supplies, but I am heading back now. You need to get warm or you will not make it through the night." Kresh wanted to tell him to leave her alone, that she was not his problem, that associating with an orc would only bring him trouble. But the warmth of his coat was already working its way through her defenses, and she found herself leaning into it like a starving woman leaning into the smell of bread. Henry seemed to take her silence as assent, or perhaps he simply did not care whether she agreed, because he scooped her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing despite her orcish build, and she was too weak and too cold to protest. She felt herself pressed against his chest, heard his heart beating steady and strong, and then he was walking, carrying her through the snow while she drifted in a haze of confusion and unexpected warmth. The journey to his farm passed in fragments, moments of awareness separated by long stretches of gray nothing. She remembered being placed on a wagon seat, wrapped in blankets that smelled of hay and something clean she could not identify. She remembered the rhythmic plodding of horses and the creak of wagon wheels. She remembered Henry's voice, low and reassuring, though she could not make out the words. And then there was warmth, real warmth, the kind that came from a blazing fire, and she was being carried again, this time into a small wooden house that felt like heaven after weeks of cold and exposure. Henry laid her on a bed near the fireplace, piling more blankets over her, then disappeared for a moment before returning with a mug of something hot that steamed in the firelight. "Broth," he said, kneeling beside the bed. "Just beef and vegetables, nothing fancy, but it will help. Can you hold the mug?" Her hands shook violently when she tried, so he held it for her, tipping small sips into her mouth while she swallowed automatically, the hot liquid burning down her throat in the most wonderful way. She drank until the mug was empty, and only then did she manage to croak out actual words. "Why are you helping me?" Henry set the mug aside and met her eyes, his expression serious. "Because you needed help. Is there meant to be more to it than that? I am an orc." Her voice sounded like gravel, harsh and broken. "Humans do not help orcs. They especially do not bring them into their homes. Well, I am not most humans, I suppose." He stood and moved to the fireplace, adding another log. "You can stay here tonight, get warm, get some food in you. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Kresh wanted to argue, wanted to explain that there was no next, that she was drowning in debt and had nowhere to go and no prospects of anything changing. But exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and she found herself sinking into the bed, into the warmth, into the first safety she had felt in months. Sleep claimed her completely this time, deep and dreamless, her body finally surrendering to its desperate need for rest. She woke to daylight streaming through a small window. The fire burned down to glowing embers, her body aching in every joint but blessedly warm. For a moment she could not remember where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up quickly, looking around the small house with wide eyes. It was a simple place. One room with a fireplace, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding dishes and supplies, everything neat and well-maintained but clearly belonging to someone who lived alone and had little interest in decoration. Henry was not inside, but she could hear sounds from outside, the lowing of cattle and the distant ring of metal on metal. She stood on shaky legs, her strength returning slowly, and caught sight of herself in a small mirror hanging near the door. She looked terrible, her green skin still pale from the cold, her dark hair matted and tangled, her clothes little better than rags. Shame washed through her, hot and acidic. What must Henry think, bringing home such a pathetic creature? She should leave before he regretted his kindness, before neighbors saw her and caused problems for him, before she could become any more of a burden than she already was. But when she opened the door, stepping out into brilliant sunshine reflecting off fresh snow, Henry looked up from where he was repairing a fence rail and called out, "You are awake. Good. There is bread and cheese on the table if you are hungry. Help yourself." Kresh hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that carried across the yard. Henry grinned, an expression so genuine and unguarded that it startled her. "I will take that as a yes. Eat. I will be in shortly to make some proper breakfast." She retreated back inside, found the bread and cheese where he had said, and ate slowly, savoring every bite despite wanting to devour it all at once. The bread was fresh, the cheese sharp and good, simple food but more than she had eaten in days. She was still eating when Henry came in, stomping snow from his boots, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the smell of livestock and fresh hay. "Better?" he asked, moving to the fireplace to build up the fire again. "Yes, thank you." The words felt inadequate, too small for what he had done, but Kresh did not know what else to say. "I should go. I do not want to cause you trouble." Henry turned to look at her, his expression puzzled. "Where would you go?" "I do not know. Somewhere, just not here." She set down the bread, her appetite suddenly gone. "You were kind to help me, but people will talk if they see an orc staying at your farm. They will make problems for you. Let them talk." Henry shrugged, apparently unconcerned. "I do not have many neighbors out here anyway, and the ones I do have mind their own business mostly. Besides, you are in no condition to travel. Look at yourself. You can barely stand without shaking." It was true, frustratingly true, and Kresh felt tears prick at her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see. "I have nothing to offer you in return. No money, no skills you would need. I am useless." "That is not true." Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "You are alive, and that is not nothing. And I imagine you have plenty of skills, just not ones you have had the chance to use lately." He paused, then added carefully, "If you want to stay a few days, recover your strength, you are welcome to. And if you want to work in exchange for room and board, I could use help around the farm. Winter is hard work when you are alone." Kresh turned back to face him, searching his expression for deception or ulterior motives, but found only honest offer and patient waiting. "Why would you do this?" "You do not know me. I could be anyone, anything." Henry smiled slightly. "You could be, but I am a decent judge of character. I figure anyone who looks as defeated as you did last night has been dealt a rough hand by life, and I know what that feels like. My parents died when I was 16. I inherited this farm and nearly lost it 3 times before I figured out what I was doing. People helped me when they did not have to. Maybe this is me paying that forward." Something in his words, in the raw honesty of them, broke through Kresh's defenses. She found herself nodding before she fully realized she had decided. "A few days, just until I am strong enough to travel." "A few days," Henry agreed easily. "Now, how about some eggs and bacon? I am starving, and I bet you could eat more than bread and cheese." Those few days stretched into a week, then 2, as winter settled in hard, and Kresh found herself folding into the rhythm of farm life with surprising ease. Henry had been right that she had skills. She was strong despite her recent hardships, stronger than him in raw power, though he had the advantage of practice and experience. She learned to feed the cattle, to muck out stalls, to repair fences and haul firewood, and do the 100 small tasks that kept a farm running through the frozen months. Henry taught her patiently, never condescending, always willing to show her again if she did not understand the first time. They fell into a companionable routine, working during the day, sharing meals in the evening, sleeping with Henry giving her the bed while he took blankets near the fire despite her protests. They talked while they worked, small conversations at first, then deeper ones. Kresh told him about her father, about the debt, about the shame of failing everyone who had trusted her family. Henry told her about losing his parents, about the loneliness of running a farm alone, about the way the seasons turned, and the satisfaction of watching things grow even when the work was hard. "I always thought I would have a family by now," Henry admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, mending harnesses. "A wife, children, the usual progression of life." But farming is hard work and leaves little time for courting, and most of the women in town want someone with more money and less dirt under their fingernails. He said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. I suppose I am meant to be alone. You should not be, Kresh said quietly. You are a good man. Any woman would be fortunate to have you. Henry looked at her across the firelight, something unreadable in his eyes. Any woman. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Kresh did not want to name, and she looked down at the harness in her hands, her heart beating too fast. I should finish this. The leather is stubborn. Henry did not push, just returned to his own work, but the silence that followed felt different, heavier with things unsaid. Kresh lay awake that night, listening to Henry's even breathing from across the room, trying to understand the strange ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical pain, and everything to do with the impossible situation she found herself in. She was falling for him, she realized with a jolt of horror. Falling for this human farmer who had saved her life and asked nothing in return except honest work and honest company. It was foolish and doomed and utterly pointless, because even if he somehow felt the same, which was absurd to even consider, there was no future for an orc and a human together. The world would not allow it. She needed to leave before she did something stupid like confess feelings that would only make things awkward and ruin the fragile peace they had built. But every time she resolved to go, something stopped her. The weather would turn particularly bitter, or Henry would need help with a difficult task, or he would smile at her over breakfast in that way that made her feel seen and valued for the first time in her life. The days accumulated, winter deepening, and Kresh remained. It was nearly a month after her arrival when the first real problem emerged. Henry had gone into town for supplies, something he did every few weeks, and Kresh had stayed at the farm as usual, not wanting to cause him trouble by being seen with him. She was hauling water from the well when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. Her first instinct was to hide, but before she could act, 3 men rode into the yard, dismounting with the casual authority of people accustomed to being obeyed. The leader was a tall man with gray hair and expensive clothes, his face hard and cold. He looked at Kresh with naked disgust. Well, an orc, right here on Jameson's farm, interesting. Kresh set down the water bucket slowly, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. I work here. There is no trouble. No trouble, the man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your very existence is trouble, orc, but that is not why I am here today. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, snapped it open with a theatrical flourish. I am here about the matter of outstanding debts. You are Kresh, daughter of Toruk the trader, yes. Her blood went cold. Yes. Then you owe my organization a substantial sum of money, 12,000 gold pieces to be precise, with interest accumulating daily. He smiled, showing too many teeth. I am Marcus Holloway, and I make it my business to collect what is owed. You have been difficult to locate, but I am nothing if not persistent. I have no money, Kresh said flatly. You took everything already. There is nothing left to take. Not from you, perhaps, but you work for Jameson, which means he is harboring a debtor. That makes him liable, legally speaking. Marcus's smile widened. Unless you can pay, I will be forced to seize assets from him to cover your debt. The farm, the livestock, everything. It is all quite legal, I assure you. You cannot do that. Kresh felt panic rising in her throat. This is not his debt. He has nothing to do with it. He does now by employing you. The law is very clear on this matter. Marcus refolded the paper, tucked it away. Of course, if you can produce 12,000 gold pieces by, say, the end of the week, we can forget this entire unpleasant business. Can you do that? Kresh wanted to lunge at him to tear that smug expression off his face, but she knew that violence would only make things worse. No. You know I cannot. Pity. Marcus remounted his horse. Then I will be back in 1 week to begin seizure proceedings. I suggest you make peace with your employer and explain why he is about to lose everything because he was foolish enough to help an orc. He turned his horse, his companions following. 1 week, Miss Kresh, not a day more. They rode away, leaving Kresh standing frozen in the yard, her mind racing in useless circles. This could not be happening. After everything, after finally finding something like safety and purpose, it was all going to be ripped away, and worse, Henry would suffer for her presence. She should run right now, disappear before Marcus could return, but she knew that would not save Henry. If Marcus had found her here, the legal connection was already made. Running would not erase that. Henry returned an hour later, his wagon loaded with supplies, whistling cheerfully until he saw her expression. Kresh, what happened? You look like you have seen a ghost. She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush, ending with, I am so sorry. I did not know they would come here. I did not think about the legal implications. This is all my fault, and now you are going to lose your farm because of me. Henry stood very still while she spoke, his expression growing grimmer with each word, but when she finished, he simply began unloading the wagon. Well, that is a problem. A problem, Kresh stared at him. Henry, they are going to take everything from you. Your farm, your livelihood, all of it, because I was too selfish to leave when I should have. You were not selfish. You were surviving. Henry carried a sack of flour into the house, returned for more supplies. And Marcus Holloway is a snake who makes money by exploiting legal loopholes and other people's desperation. I have heard of him. He buys up debts for pennies and then extracts full value through any means necessary. That does not solve the problem. Kresh followed him, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. How can you be so calm about this? Henry set down a box of supplies and turned to face her fully. Because panicking will not help. We need to think this through logically. He rubbed his jaw, thinking. 12,000 gold pieces. That is more money than I will make in a decade of farming. I have maybe 300 saved, and even if I sold everything, it would not come close. Then you should turn me in. Let them take me. Kresh heard the desperation in her own voice. At least that way you might save the farm. Absolutely not. Henry's voice was firm, brooking no argument. We are not sacrificing you to that vulture. There has to be another way. They spent the evening discussing options, each more hopeless than the last. Henry could not borrow that much money. Kresh could not earn it. They could run, but that would mean abandoning the farm and living as fugitives. And Henry had worked too hard to build this life to give it up without exhausting every other possibility. As night fell and the fire burned low, they sat in silence, the weight of the impossible situation pressing down on them like the winter snow pressing on the roof. I have one idea, Henry said finally, his voice quiet. It is insane and you will probably hate it, but it is the only thing I can think of that might work. Kresh looked up, desperate enough to consider anything. What is it? Henry met her eyes, his expression serious and uncertain all at once. Marry me. For a moment, Kresh could not process the words. They made so little sense in the context of their conversation. What? Marry me, Henry repeated, speaking faster now as if he needed to get it all out before he lost his nerve. If you are my wife legally, then your debts become joint debts, which means they cannot seize the farm without seizing assets from both of us. But more than that, there is an old law, barely used anymore, that says marital debts can be negotiated as a family unit. It gives us legal standing to contest the claim, to force Marcus to accept a payment plan rather than immediate seizure. It is not a perfect solution, but it would buy us time, maybe years, to figure something out. Kresh felt like the world had tilted sideways. You are talking about a legal strategy, a marriage of convenience to protect your farm. Yes. Henry hesitated. Unless you would want it to be more than that, but I am getting ahead of myself. The point is, it would give us options we do not have right now. It would make you legally part of this farm, which means Marcus cannot just take you or it without going through a much more complicated process. You would marry an orc to save your farm. Kresh could not keep the bitterness from her voice. Do you have any idea what that would mean for you? The ostracism, the prejudice, the way people would treat you. I have some idea, yes. Henry's voice was steady. And I am telling you it would be worth it, not just for the farm, Kresh, for you. Because you deserve better than running and hiding and drowning in a debt that was not even yours to begin with. Because this last month has been the best month I have had in years, and the thought of you leaving, of you being taken by Marcus or freezing to death somewhere, it makes me sick. So yes, I would marry you, and I would be proud to call you my wife if you would have me. Kresh felt tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. You do not mean that. You are just being kind because you are a good person who cannot stand to see someone suffer. I mean it. Henry stood, crossed to where she sat, knelt in front of her so they were eye level. I mean every word. I will clear every debt you owe if you marry me, not because I pity you but because I care about you. Because somewhere in the last month I fell in love with you, and I know that is probably the worst timing in history and you probably think I am insane, but there it is. I love you, Kresh. I want you to stay, not as a worker or a guest, but as my partner, my wife, my family. Kresh looked into his eyes, those honest gray eyes that had never lied to her, and saw the truth there. He meant it. Every impossible, wonderful, terrifying word. I am an orc, she whispered. We would have no future. Society would never accept us. Then we will make our own acceptance, out here on this farm where no one else's opinion matters. Henry took her hands carefully, his touch warm and gentle. I am not asking you to solve all the world's problems. I am just asking if you would want to build a life with me. If the answer is no, I will understand, and we will figure out some other way to deal with Marcus. But if the answer is yes, or even maybe, then say so. Give us a chance. Kresh had spent so long believing she was doomed to a life of struggle and loneliness that her father's mistakes had poisoned any possibility of happiness for her. But here was Henry, offering her something she had never dared to imagine. A home, a partner, love. It was insane and impossible and flew in the face of every social norm that existed between their peoples, and she wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything. Yes, she said, the word coming out choked and watery but unmistakable. Yes, I will marry you. Henry's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, joy transforming his features. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Kresh clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped around each other, the impossible made real by the simple fact of choosing it together. When they finally pulled apart, Henry was still grinning. We should do it soon. Tomorrow if we can. The faster you are legally my wife, the stronger our position when Marcus returns. Tomorrow, Kresh agreed, still dazed by the speed of it all. How do we even get married? Will anyone agree to perform the ceremony? Henry thought for a moment. There is a priest in the next town over, Father Benedict. He is old and cares more about people's hearts than their species. If I explain the situation, I think he will help us. We can ride there in the morning. They stayed up late making plans. The fear of Marcus's threat transformed into determined action. Henry found his mother's wedding ring, a simple silver band that had been sitting in a drawer for years, and slipped it onto Kresh's finger where it fit perfectly. She looked at it, this symbol of promises and futures, and felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like hope. They left before dawn the next morning, riding together on Henry's wagon through snow-covered roads, reaching the town of Greenfield by mid-morning. Father Benedict turned out to be exactly as Henry had described, a white-haired man with kind eyes who listened to their story without judgment. An orc and a human, he mused, sitting back in his chair. That is unusual, certainly. But I have performed stranger marriages in my time, and I have learned that love is love, whatever form it takes. If you two are certain this is what you want, I will marry you this very day. We are certain, Henry and Kresh said together, then looked at each other and smiled. The ceremony was simple, just the three of them in the small church. Father Benedict's voice echoing in the empty space as he spoke the traditional words about love and commitment and building a life together. Kresh felt like she was dreaming, standing beside Henry in her worn clothes that were not remotely appropriate for a wedding, speaking vows that bound her to this man who had saved her in every way it was possible to save someone. When Father Benedict told them to kiss, Henry cupped her face gently, mindful of her tusks, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Father Benedict said warmly. May your life together be blessed with joy and prosperity. They rode home in a haze of happiness, the legal documents Father Benedict had prepared safely tucked in Henry's coat. Kresh could not stop looking at the ring on her finger, this tangible proof that she belonged somewhere to someone, that she was no longer alone against the world. Henry caught her looking and squeezed her hand, his own joy evident in every line of his face. No regrets. He asked as their farm came into view. No regrets, Kresh confirmed. Only that I did not ask you sooner. Henry brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson. The name sent a thrill through her, foreign and wonderful. Mrs. Jameson. Wife, family. Words she had never expected to claim. They arrived home as the sun was setting, painting the snow golden and pink, the farm looking more beautiful than Kresh had ever seen it. This was her home now, truly, legally, and the knowledge settled into her bones like warmth after cold. That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed by the fireplace, learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration and growing passion. Henry touched her like she was precious, mapping the green expanse of her skin with reverent hands, kissing her tusks instead of recoiling from them, whispering how beautiful she was until she believed it. Kresh discovered the joy of being wanted, of being chosen, her hands finding the planes of Henry's body, drawing sounds from him that spoke of pleasure and connection. They moved together awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence, building to a crescendo that left them both breathless and tangled together in sweaty satisfaction. I love you, Henry murmured against her shoulder as they lay in the aftermath, heart still racing. I love you too, Kresh replied, the words still feeling new and strange but utterly true. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since her father's death, Kresh slept without nightmares, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Marcus Holloway returned exactly 1 week after his first visit, riding into the yard with the same 2 companions and the same smug expression. Kresh and Henry met him together, standing side by side, presenting a united front. Miss Kresh, Marcus greeted, dismounting. I trust you have had time to consider your situation. Have you miraculously acquired 12,000 gold pieces? It is Mrs. Jameson now, Kresh said calmly, and you will need to take up debt collection with my husband. Marcus's expression flickered, surprise quickly masked by calculation. Husband, how convenient. I suppose you think this changes things. It does change things, Henry said, stepping forward and producing the marriage certificate. My wife's debts are now joint marital debts, which means you cannot seize the farm without going through formal family asset review. And before you try to claim otherwise, I have already consulted with a lawyer in Greenfield, who confirms that the Marriage Protection Act of 1447 absolutely applies in this situation. Marcus took the certificate, scanned it, his jaw tightening. This is a transparent attempt to evade legitimate debt collection. This is a legitimate marriage performed by Father Benedict and filed with the county clerk. Henry's voice was calm but firm, and the law is clear. You want to collect this debt. You go through the proper legal channels for married debtors, which means negotiated payment plans and family court. You do not get to just ride in and take everything. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing, clearly calculating whether it was worth pushing forward. Finally, he thrust the certificate back at Henry. Fine. You want to do this the hard way, we will do it the hard way. I will see you in family court in 3 months. Enjoy your brief reprieve, because when this is over, I will own everything you have. We will see about that, Henry said evenly. Marcus mounted his horse, his companions following suit. Congratulations on your marriage, he said with poisonous sarcasm. I am sure you will be very happy together in the brief time before you lose everything. They watched him ride away, and only when he was completely out of sight did Kresh release the breath she had been holding. That bought us time, but it did not solve the problem. He will come back with lawyers and documents, and we will still owe 12,000 gold pieces we do not have. I know, Henry acknowledged, but time is what we needed. 3 months to figure out a real solution. He turned to her, took her hands. We will face it together. That is what marriage means, right? Facing problems together. Kresh squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his certainty. Together, she agreed. The next 3 months passed in a blur of hard work and careful planning. Henry consulted with lawyers, learning everything he could about debt law and family asset protection. Kresh threw herself into farm work, determined to make the farm as productive as possible to show the court they were a viable, functional household. Together they strategized, researched, and prepared for the coming legal battle. But it was not all stress and planning. They also built a life together, a real marriage beyond the legal convenience that had prompted it. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences. Kresh discovering that Henry sang while he worked and hated mushrooms but would never admit it. Henry learning that Kresh had a wicked sense of humor when she relaxed and could track weather patterns better than any farmer he had ever known. They made love regularly, growing more confident and adventurous, finding joy in the physical expression of their deepening emotional bond. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, snow melting to reveal muddy earth that would soon be ready for planting. Kresh had never experienced the turning of seasons from the perspective of a farmer, had never understood the hope inherent in preparing fields for crops that would not be harvested for months. Working beside Henry, she began to see it, the faith required to plant seeds and trust they would grow, the patience needed to tend something you could not immediately benefit from. It felt like a metaphor for their marriage, planting something in difficult soil and trusting it would take root and flourish. 6 weeks after their wedding, Kresh realized her monthly cycle had not come. At first she dismissed it as stress, but when a second week passed, she began to suspect the truth. She said nothing to Henry, not wanting to add another complication to their already complicated situation, but she watched for other signs. Nausea in the mornings, unusual tiredness, a heightened sensitivity to smells. All pointed to the same conclusion. She was pregnant. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. A child, half orc and half human, born into a world that would not easily accept them. But also, a child born from love, a tangible symbol of the impossible thing she and Henry had built together. She wanted to tell him but could not find the words, could not figure out how to add this enormous news to everything else they were dealing with. The decision was taken from her hands 2 weeks later when Henry found her vomiting behind the barn early one morning. He held her hair back, rubbed her shoulders, then asked gently, "How long have you known?" Kresh wiped her mouth, leaned back against the barn wall. "A few weeks. I was not sure how to tell you." Henry sat beside her in the mud, apparently unconcerned about his clothes. "Are you happy about it? Scared? Both." "Both," Kresh admitted. "It is terrible timing. We are about to go to court, we might lose everything, and now there will be a child to worry about. Or," Henry said slowly, "there will be a child to fight for. Another reason to make sure we win." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "I know this is not how we planned things, but I am happy, Kresh. Terrified, but happy. We are going to be parents." Kresh felt tears sting her eyes. "You really are happy." "I really am." Henry pulled her into his arms, held her close. "We will figure this out, all of it, together." The family court hearing took place in the county seat, a full day's travel from their farm. Kresh and Henry rose before dawn, dressed in their best clothes, and made the journey with nervous energy crackling between them. The courthouse was an imposing stone building that made Kresh feel small and out of place, but Henry squeezed her hand as they walked in, a silent reminder that they were in this together. Marcus was already there with 2 expensive-looking lawyers, his expression confident. He barely glanced at Kresh and Henry, clearly considering them beneath his notice. The judge, a severe-looking woman named Magistrate Clearwater, called the court to order and reviewed the case documents with efficient professionalism. "Mr. Holloway, you claim that the defendant owes your organization 12,000 gold pieces in inherited debt and that Mr. Jameson is liable through marriage. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," one of Marcus's lawyers said smoothly. "The debt is legitimate, inherited from Kresh's father Toruk, and under normal circumstances would be collectible through seizure of assets. However, the defendant married Mr. Jameson in what we believe was a transparent attempt to shield assets from collection." "Your Honor, if I may," the lawyer Henry had hired, a sharp woman named Catherine Norwood, stood. "The marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Jameson is completely legitimate and was performed in good faith. The fact that it provides legal protection from predatory debt collection is a feature of the law, not a bug. The Marriage Protection Act exists specifically to prevent cases like this, where a debt collector attempts to destroy a family's livelihood over inherited debts." Magistrate Clearwater looked at Kresh and Henry. "Mrs. Jameson, when did you marry your husband?" Kresh stood, her heart pounding. 3 months ago, Your Honor, the day after Mr. Holloway threatened to seize the farm." "And was the marriage genuine or simply a legal maneuver?" Kresh met the judge's eyes steadily. "It was both, Your Honor. Henry, my husband, offered marriage as a way to protect us both legally, but it became a real marriage. We love each other. We built a life together. I am carrying his child." She had not planned to mention the pregnancy, but it spilled out, urgent and true. A ripple of reaction went through the courtroom. Marcus's expression tightened. Magistrate Clearwater's severe face softened slightly. "I see, Mr. Jameson, is this true? You married Mrs. Jameson knowing about her debts and you are expecting a child together." Henry stood beside Kresh, his hand finding hers. "Yes, Your Honor. I married Kresh because I love her and because it was the right thing to do. Her father's debts are not her fault, and I will not stand by and let someone destroy her life over money she never owed in the first place." Magistrate Clearwater was quiet for a moment, reviewing documents. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Holloway, what was the original debt that Toruk incurred?" Marcus's lawyer consulted his papers. The original debt was 6,000 gold pieces, loaned to various orc families who defaulted. Toruk guaranteed the loans. And how did that become 12,000? "Interest and collection fees, Your Honor, all perfectly legal under the terms of the original agreement." "I am sure it is legal," the judge said dryly. "That does not make it just. This court has reviewed the case, and I am making the following ruling. The Jamesons will be required to pay the original debt of 6,000 gold pieces, not the inflated amount Mr. Holloway claims. Furthermore, they will be allowed to pay this debt over a period of 10 years at reasonable interest, with payments adjusted based on farm income. Mr. Holloway, your organization will accept this payment plan or forfeit the debt entirely. Those are your options." Marcus shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that is completely unacceptable. We have rights as creditors. And the Jamesons have rights as a married family unit, Mr. Holloway. This is my ruling. Appeal it if you wish, but I suspect you will find higher courts even less sympathetic to debt collectors who try to extract double the original debt through fees and interest." Magistrate Clearwater's gaze was steely. "I am sick of seeing people like you profit off other people's desperation. Consider yourself fortunate I am allowing you to collect anything at all." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and just like that, it was over. Kresh stood frozen, unable to fully process what had just happened. They had won. Not completely, they still owed money, but it was manageable, spread over 10 years with reasonable terms. The farm was safe. Their future was secure. Henry pulled her into his arms right there in the courtroom, laughing with relief. "We did it. We actually did it." Kresh clung to him, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot believe it. I thought for sure we would lose everything." "Not everything," Henry said, pulling back to look at her, his eyes bright. "We still have each other. We still have our family." His hand moved to her stomach, still flat but carrying their child. "That is everything that matters." They left the courthouse hand in hand, ignoring Marcus's furious glare, stepping out into spring sunshine that felt like benediction. The ride home was joyous, filled with relief and planning and wonder at how dramatically their lives had changed in just a few months. Kresh had gone from freezing to death in an alley to married, pregnant, and secure, all because one man had decided that kindness mattered more than convention. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The farm prospered under their combined efforts, Kresh's strength and weather sense complementing Henry's knowledge and experience. They made their debt payments faithfully, slowly whittling down what they owed while building equity in their land and livestock. The prejudice they faced from neighbors was real but manageable, most people eventually accepting that the Jamesons kept to themselves and caused no trouble. Kresh gave birth to a daughter in early winter, a healthy baby with her mother's green skin and her father's gray eyes, tusks small and delicate. They named her Arya, and she became the center of their world, a laughing, curious child who knew nothing of the prejudice that might await her, and was raised with absolute certainty that she was loved beyond measure. 2 years later, a son followed, this one looking more human but with pointed ears and his mother's strong build. They named him Thomas, and he and Arya were inseparable from the moment he could crawl, partners in mischief and adventure. Henry proved to be exactly the father Kresh had hoped, patient and playful, teaching their children to work the farm but also to find joy in small things, to be kind without being weak, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. Kresh taught them about their orc heritage, told them stories of their grandfather Toruk, and the belief in bridges between peoples that had been his downfall and his greatest strength. The children grew up belonging to both worlds and neither, carving their own identity as something new. 10 years after their marriage, Kresh and Henry made the final payment on her father's debt. They burned the discharge papers in the fireplace that night, watching the last symbol of that burden turn to ash while their children slept peacefully upstairs in the bedroom Henry had built when the house got too small for their growing family. "You ever regret it?" Kresh asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Marrying me, taking on all the complications that came with it." Henry wrapped his arm around her, pulled her close. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Kresh. You and our children, this life we built together. I would do it all again without hesitation." Kresh turned to kiss him, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into the gesture. "I love you. I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I have words for." "I know," Henry said softly. "I love you too. Always." They sat together watching the fire burn low, the house quiet around them, the farm peaceful under starlight. Outside, the fields they had planted together waited for spring, patient and full of promise. Kresh thought about that night 10 years ago when she had been dying in an alley, certain she had nothing left to live for, and marveled at how completely wrong she had been. Life was not perfect. They still struggled sometimes with money, with the children's questions about why they looked different from other families, with the occasional act of prejudice from strangers. But they faced it together, their partnership stronger for having weathered so many storms. The farm thrived. The children flourished. And every day, Kresh woke up beside the man who had saved her in every way possible, and chose to keep building this impossible, wonderful life they had created. 20 years after that first desperate night, Kresh stood in the same farmyard that had become her sanctuary and watched her daughter Arya marry a kind young man from the next county who loved her despite and because of her mixed heritage. Thomas stood beside his sister as a witness, tall and strong, preparing to take over more of the farm work as Henry's hair grayed and his body slowed. The farm had expanded over the years, enough that they now employed several workers and had become known throughout the region for quality livestock and fair dealing. Henry found Kresh during the celebration, pulled her aside from the crowd of well-wishers and neighbors who had, over time, become something like friends. "Our little girl is married," he said, wonder in his voice. "When did we get old enough for that to happen?" "I have no idea," Kresh admitted, leaning into his familiar warmth. "It feels like yesterday we were standing in Father Benedict's church, having no idea what we were doing." "We figured it out, though," Henry said, watching Arya dance with her new husband, joy radiating from every inch of her. "We made something good. We made something beautiful," Kresh corrected. "Against all odds, against everything the world said was impossible, we made a family and a life and a future. Your crazy proposal in the middle of a crisis turned into this." She gestured to the celebration, the farm, their children and the friends who had gathered to witness love triumph over prejudice. Henry pulled her into a dance, moving slowly to the music the hired musicians played. "Best crazy decision I ever made. Proposing to a freezing, homeless orc I found in an alley. Best crazy decision I ever made, saying yes to a human farmer who offered to clear all my debts if I married him." Kresh rested her head on his shoulder, swaying in his arms. "Thank you, Henry, for seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when I was worthless, for loving me into existence." "You were never worthless," Henry said fiercely. "You were always extraordinary. I just got lucky enough to notice." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for being my partner in every sense of the word." They danced as the sun set over their farm, over the fields they had planted and harvested together for 2 decades, over the home they had built and filled with love and laughter and the sweet chaos of family. Around them, people celebrated, but Kresh and Henry existed in their own bubble, marking this moment of transition, their daughter beginning her own journey while they continued theirs. That night, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to their own homes or rooms, Kresh and Henry lay in bed together, bodies fitted together with the ease of long familiarity. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had left me in that alley?" Kresh asked into the darkness. "Never," Henry said immediately, "because there was never a world where I would have left you there. From the moment I saw you freezing and alone, there was only one choice: help you, save you, keep you. Even if you had known everything it would lead to. The court case, the prejudice, the complications. Especially knowing that," Henry said firmly, "because it also led to Aria and Thomas, to this farm flourishing, to 20 years of waking up beside the woman I love, to a life richer and fuller than I ever imagined possible when I was a lonely farmer wondering if I would spend my whole life alone." Kresh rolled to face him, finding his eyes in the moonlight streaming through their window. "I was so certain I was going to die that night. I had given up. And then you appeared like something from a story, offering me impossible things. The only impossible thing was thinking we could not make it work," Henry said, cupping her face tenderly. "Everything else was just determination and love and refusing to let the world tell us no." "I love you," Kresh whispered. 20 years later, and I love you more than I did on our wedding day." "I love you too," Henry replied. 20 years later, and I would still clear every debt you owe if you married me. I would make that offer every single day for the rest of my life." They kissed, soft and slow, a reaffirmation of vows spoken 2 decades ago and renewed every day since through actions and choices and commitment. Outside, the farm slept peacefully under stars. Inside, 2 people who had been saved by each other held close, grateful for the improbable miracle of their life together. Years continued to pass, measured in harvests and grandchildren, in the gradual transition from Henry and Kresh running the farm to Thomas, taking over more responsibility while they advised and supported. Aria's children visited often, beautiful mixed children who looked like their mother and carried her strength and grace. The family grew and flourished, roots sinking deep into the land that had become their sanctuary and their legacy. When Henry died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Kresh mourned him with the depth of someone who had lost not just a husband but a savior, a partner, the foundation of everything good in her life. She stood at his grave surrounded by children and grandchildren, all existing because one man had chosen kindness over convention, love over prejudice, action over apathy. "Thank you," she whispered to the earth that held him, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." Kresh lived another decade after Henry's death, supported by family, active in the farm's operation even as her body slowed. She told her grandchildren stories of that first night, of freezing in an alley and being saved by their grandfather's impossible proposal. She made sure they understood the courage it had taken, the love that had sustained them, the refusal to accept the world's limitations that had defined their family. When Kresh died at the age of 81, surrounded by the family she and Henry had created, her last thoughts were of warmth. Not the cold of that alley where she had nearly died, but the warmth of Henry's coat draped over her shoulders, his arms carrying her to safety, his voice offering impossible salvation. The warmth of his love, sustaining her through decades of joy and struggle. The warmth of family, of home, of a life built on the foundation of one man's kindness and one woman's courage to accept it. They buried her beside Henry in the farm's small cemetery, under an oak tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The headstone bore simple words: Kresh Jameson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was seen, she was chosen, she was loved. And in the farmhouse that had been her sanctuary and her home, her children and grandchildren gathered to remember and celebrate, carrying forward the legacy of an impossible love that had transformed two lives and created a family that spanned worlds. The farm continued to thrive under Thomas's care, passed eventually to his children and their children, each generation adding to the story, building on the foundation laid by a freezing, homeless orc and the farmer who had offered her everything with 6 simple words: I will clear every debt you owe if you marry me. It had been an offer born of desperation and kindness, but it had become something far greater, a promise kept, a life shared, a love that had proven stronger than prejudice, poverty, and every obstacle the world placed in their path. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the debts that had been cleared or the farm that had prospered, but the love that had sustained them through it all, shining bright as a beacon for generations to come. Proof that kindness could save, love could triumph, and impossible things could become beautifully, wonderfully real.